call the meeting to order, and this is the quarterly meeting of the Watershed Committee. And first item is to adopt the agenda. Can I get a motion?
Move approval.
Second. Very good. Can we have a roll call?
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
and Director Director Gibson.
Aye.
Okay, next, actually, do we have any public comment by anyone?
At this time, we do not.
Okay, any public comment from the board? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to item 1, which is to review and approve the minutes of the last Watershed meeting of June 18th. Is there a motion to approve or changes?
I'll move approval. Second.
Okay, can we get a roll call?
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
and Chair Bragman.
Aye. Okay, so moving on to the second item, which is the annual vegetation management report, and I assume this is Crystal. Or Sean, sorry.
Sean, no problem. Good afternoon, Watershed Committee members. Sean Horn, Watershed Resource Manager. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for this item. We put together a presentation for you today. All right, so everyone see that okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
So as mentioned, the item today is an overview of our annual vegetation management report. Attached to the staff report is the actual report. And
hey, Sean, can you make that full screen? Because we see the next slide too. Makes it smaller.
There you go. Hold on 1 second. Is that better?
All right, there you go.
Good.
Yep. All right. Sorry about that. So this is a annual report of our first year of our biodiversity, fires and fuels integrated plan, year 1. We have a presentation today for you that mirrors the annual report that's attached to the staff report and really goes through the wildfire and vegetation management coordination that we do on an annual basis, and then summarizes our environmental compliance and monitoring activities, as well as inventories that we carry out, and then the specific vegetation management actions that we're implementing, as well as the costs associated with those actions. And then we provide a brief summary of kind of our findings for this first year. So as a refresher, the BFFIP focuses on the actions that the district will implement to reduce hazards and maintain and enhance ecosystem function on our watershed lands. There's 3 primary goals within this plan. That is to minimize the risk from wildfire, preserve and enhance our biological resources on our watersheds, and provide an adaptive framework for periodic review, which is what we're here doing today. So the management actions described include monitoring, inventorying, and planning, and then on the ground vegetation management work, and then an annual reporting process. So if we look at a high level, what we were able to achieve this year, we've put together a map that summarizes all of our vegetation management activities in kind of 2 categories. The brown being Fuelbreak Maintenance. So if you'll remember, our 1995 vegetation management plan, which was previous to the BFFIP, was really about constructing fuel breaks around the watershed and through strategic locations in the watershed. And we need to maintain that infrastructure in order to get the benefits. So these are all the areas where we've done Fuelbreak Maintenance for the year. And then the green and the dark green, this is where we're doing grassland and oak woodland restoration focused on invasive species management, as well as removal of encroachment of Douglas fir, coyote brush, and things of that sort. And then also scaling up our forest restoration work, which is the dark green, specifically this year within the vicinity of Potrero Meadows. And then the hatched lines is where we're doing broom management specifically. So we'll go through all of these actions one by one, but the summary for the year is that the BFFIP BFFIP year one target was 1,000 acres of implementation. We've been able to achieve 1,220 acres of vegetation management this last fiscal year. So coordination and planning, we carry out a number of activities throughout the year to get us ready for wildfire season, but also to help educate our community about the concerns we have around wildfire. One of those is red flag warnings. We coordinate with the county and state parks to close the watershed and other open space lands during red flag or extreme fire weather. We've also installed new wildfire danger signs. That's at Sky Oaks and along Bolinas Fairfax Road. We put a picture of that in our report, and really that's just to raise people's awareness of the conditions on the watershed when they're visiting. We continue our coordination with County Fire through a contract that we've established for vegetation management support. We also conduct trainings with County Fire on a periodic basis, and they also come up and assist in a training capacity with some vegetation management work as well. We are participating with the broader fire community through Fire Safe Marin and a number of actions and really promoting fire-wise communities throughout the county as well as adjacent to our watershed. We continue our coordination with PG&E, and this is really tracking all of their operations on our district lands, specifically around their infrastructure where they have easements. And this last year, they completed 14 miles of power line vegetation management, and we oversaw and permitted that work, and also coordinated with them to ensure that they were carrying out the appropriate biological surveys in support of those activities. We coordinate with all of our leasees. So we have a number of leased properties on the watershed, and we coordinate with them specifically around defensible space planning and implementation. So we support them in doing the work, and they also are leading the work on their own, and we inspect the sites each year with them. In addition, we coordinate with adjacent landowners, and I do want to just clarify one thing in the report. We called out that we sent a specific letter to all landowners this year. Specifically, that letter was this last year was from Fire Safe Marin, encouraging wildfire planning generally and defensible space construction. In past years, we spent our own specific letter to landowners, and we will be doing this in October of this year. In the past, we have not received any responses about landowners wanting to do defensible space on the district's land. There's about 55 landowners who are adjacent to our watershed lands that have structures within 100 feet of our boundary. That's one clarification to the report. So with monitoring and inventory activities on the watershed, we completed the triannual land bird monitoring. This was something that we established during our 1995 vegetation management plan and have been carrying forward. What we found in that report this year was overall stable trend of 41 species of birds on the watershed. This is for a period from 1996 to 2019. Additionally, we carried out our yellow-legged frog monitoring. We completed our annual monitoring activities, and we'll be doing it again this fiscal year and then conducting a report. So we do 2 years of monitoring and then a report. This last year's monitoring showed that we had 26 egg masses in Little Carson and Big Carson Creek, 216 adults and 95 juvenile frogs were observed. As part of our ongoing vegetation management, we're mapping non-native invasive plant species, and we'll go into detail in our management action section, but specifically we have a database that holds all of our information about our invasive weed populations and patches. So we were able to map and treat 684 acres of invasive weeds, and also 135 patches of grassland weeds were treated through our collaboration with OneTam. In addition, additional monitoring that we're carrying out is our osprey monitoring at Kent Lake specifically. We've been doing this since the 1980s and then revised our approach in 2000s. We identified 24 occupied osprey nests and 1 occupied bald eagle nest. Our nest occupancies has been going down over the years, in part because of the bald eagle as a predator to the osprey eggs. And so this has been an ongoing trend for the last couple of years, but generally in the Bay Area, we've seen an expansion of the population. So they are stable generally. Seeps and Springs inventory, this is an inventory that we'll be conducting in year 3 of the BFFIP. However, we've been getting in front of it by doing some additional work associated with our forestry restoration actions to collect some data that will inform that larger inventory in year 3 of the BFFIP. So at Potrero Meadow, we installed 2 gauges and we also mapped all the springs within that project area this year. As part of our Resilient Forest Research Project, we're continuing our ongoing studies. We have 45 acres of established monitoring activities that were done to inform our forest restoration work that's included in the BFFIP. In those study areas, we've been able to identify a 60 reduction in fire fuels. We've identified a small increase in water yield associated with forest hydrology. And then in carbon monitoring, we've seen a 60% increase in carbon storage associated with the soil carbon storage. We've also seen a need to continue with some reforestation activities to see if we can increase disease tolerance within some of the species within these sites. So we go in and we remove the tan oak. Sometimes there's gaps. And so we've been working with the U.S. Forest Service to actually install some other tree species to see if they can fill those gaps. Environmental compliance, one of the critical activities that we do in front of all of our vegetation management work to ensure that we can protect the biological resources of the watershed, are environmental compliance activities. That starts with our crew trainings. We completed crew trainings and contractor trainings before new vegetation management projects, and specifically to give them an understanding of the goals of the projects and identify the avoidance areas that we have for each of our projects, as well as access routes to the sites so that we can minimize our disturbance in the areas that we're working. Prior to doing any work, we conduct pre-project hydrology, geology, biology, and cultural resource evaluations, really looking at our data sets to understand what resources are within our project areas and what needs to be avoided during our activities. For avoidance measures for northern spotted owl, we conduct annual monitoring of nesting sites on the watershed to ensure that we can establish the appropriate buffers to conduct our work. So if we identify active nests, we create buffers around those nests, and we don't do any noise disturbing work in those areas during that period of the year. This is a critical one. It also gives us information about the long-term trends of those populations and species on our watershed and throughout the county generally. Also, we've been conducting our pre-vegetation management nesting bird surveys, completing nesting bird surveys for new vegetation management sites, and actually flagging any nests observed in the sites and GPSing those nests, and then creating the appropriate buffers and completely avoiding those nests. It's a fairly significant endeavor to have crews out in front of all of our veg management work, so it takes time and care. We've carried that forward into our roosting bat surveys. This is a new activity that we're doing in our forest restoration sites, basically looking for any structural habitat within trees, or this can be like large cavities or furrowed bark, and actually identifying those trees as areas to be left alone and avoided completely. We aren't really looking to influence or remove any of these habitat features. This creates some complexity in our forest that we really want to preserve. So we've come up with an approach where we actually go out, identify habitat, map it, and then create a buffer and work around it. We take a similar approach to our rare plant compliance. So we conduct pre-project compliance surveys and actually identify and GPS any rare plants within a potential project area and create an avoidance zone around those rare plants. So now moving from compliance into our vegetation management actions. Fuelbreaks, as I mentioned, we're really focused on maintaining our fuel break infrastructure. We've built a lot of really good fuel break infrastructure through our 1995 vegetation management plan. Now we need to ensure that we maintain it to maintain that function. So we completed 150 acres of Fuelbreak maintenance this year. This work was intended to maintain and reduce fuel loads and improve fan structure to slow fire spread and reduce flame lengths if a fire was to move through the watershed. And we did this at a cost of about $312,000 this year. Defensible space, so we work around all of our infrastructure as well as our leased infrastructure to create defensible space with a focus on high use areas such as parking lot, picnic areas, and some of our leased properties as well, sorry. So we completed 40 acres of this work at a cost of about $16,000 this year. Broom removal from fuel breaks. This was an activity that we carry out on an annual basis. Most of our fuel breaks on our cyclical maintenance cycle. So we come back to each of these fuel breaks on a yearly or bi-yearly basis and remove broom from those fuel breaks where it's identified. This year we completed 207 acres of broom removal in our fuel break infrastructure. Roadside mowing is another activity that we carry out on an annual basis. And this is critical for ensuring that we have access to our water facilities for maintenance and operations. It's also critical for ensuring that we have emergency response access, not just for a wildfire, but also for medical aids, and then also preserves recreational access through the watershed. So we completed 12 acres. This is one of the more expensive activities that we complete. This was at a cost of about $4,000. Per the Department of Water Resources, we're required to maintain vegetation on our dam faces. So this year we completed 37 acres of vegetation management on all of our dams at a cost of about $21,000. This is slightly above what the BFFIP year 1 target was, and that was because we maintained some access routes up to those dams as well this year. So new Fuelbreak construction, this is an activity where each year in the BFFIP, we've identified about 10 acres of Fuelbreak that we'd like to be expanding upon. This year we focused our work in the Fern Canyon Fuelbreak area, and we completed 3.4 acres, so slightly below our target, but at a cost of about $47,000. This is one of the most expensive activities that we undertake because it is a new Fuelbreak and there's a lot of vegetation that is required to be managed in order to achieve the desired conditions within that Fuelbreak infrastructure. An important activity that we get a lot of benefit from working with our collaborating partners through the OneTAM initiative is the early detection rapid response. This is where we actually go out and survey roads and trails throughout the watershed and other small patches of non-native invasive plants and actually manage those by hand throughout the watershed. But we're not only doing this, the real benefit of the collaboration is that it's not only being done on the watershed, but also on the surrounding open space lands. So the early detection rapid response team is working on state parks, national parks, and Marin County parks land as well, trying to kind of get in front of any of those non-native species that might be in those bordering lands from coming into the watershed. This is a strong collaborative that's been very successful, and this year we were able to achieve the management of 135 patches, which is 35 patches above our year 1 target, which was 100 patches. So a new activity that we've started scaling up under the BFFIP is our forest restoration work. This year we focused our efforts around Potrero Meadows, and we were able to complete 70 acres of new forest restoration work. This was a significant endeavor. It built off the research work we've been doing for the last 5 years with the U.S. Forest Service, but also was an example of how we can use multiple different types of contractors to do this work in a pretty efficient way comparatively. We also increased maintenance of previously treated forestry restoration sites. So we completed 16 acres. This is about 8 acres above what our target was in the BFFIP. And I think one thing to call out here is that our maintenance of forestry sites will continue to climb as we do new forestry sites. So maintenance is much less expensive than new forestry sites. And so we want to make sure that we're continuing to maintain the investment that we put into these sites to ensure that we get the forest structure that we're targeting. And so we will see year after year that our maintenance in acreage will go up because we'll be maintaining more sites. As part of the Resilient Forest Project, we're continuing monitoring work. Some of this is being done through our collaborating partners of UC Davis and Cal Poly. Now, when we add our new forestry sites, we have about 120 acres where we're conducting some sort of monitoring in it. We spent about $20,000 this year. We were hoping to have some publications come out this year on our forest restoration monitoring. However, due to COVID, we had some delays with our research partners. And so we hope those publications come out in 2021 that really demonstrate the benefit from an environmental service point of view of the forestry restoration work we're doing. And we're looking for other ways to carry forward with monitoring as we continue this work so we can understand the benefits that we're getting out of implementing this forestry restoration. So in addition to forestry restoration, we also look at removal of Douglas fir from grasslands and meadow habitats. This is a species that is known to be encroaching into those habitats, and on the watershed land, we've actually seen a reduction in 40 to 50% of our grasslands, in part from the encroachment of Douglas fir or coyote brush. So we're managing these species to try to preserve those habitat types. This year we completed 36 acres of management. We're also maintaining 163 acres this year. Maintenance of this is really critical. It's a much less expensive endeavor, and it really benefits us for multiple purposes, but also it's moving forward, we'll see maintenance go up as well, similar to our forestry restoration activities. We also manage Broom outside of our Fuelbreak infrastructure. So this year we implemented 37 acres of management of Broom outside of our Fuelbreak infrastructure at a cost of about $47,000. We have other priority non-native species that we manage throughout the watershed. These are some examples: goat grass, star thistle, and then there's other priority ones like cheatgrass. We're conducting this using a number of contractors, and this is all handwork that we're going out and surveying areas where we know these non-natives have persisted and trying to actually hand pull them and manage them over time. So this is a kind of summary of our costs associated with those activities. And I'll just note that the other priority weeds that we're managing, The cost is somewhat high because it does require a level of technical expertise to be able to identify a lot of these weeds and actually manage them appropriately. So the contractors we're using are different than some of the contractors are using for other activities on the watershed. So to summarize the costs for you, if we look at the BFFIP year one estimate, the inventory, monitoring, and planning was $137,000. Our actual costs for 2020 were $293,000. And this is really a function of the environmental compliance that we're doing in front of our project activities to ensure that we can minimize potential impacts on any sensitive resources. And this is really a critical thing for us to think about because we'll probably continue to see an increase in these costs year after year. And when we look back at the BFFIP and how it's written, it's a really thoughtful document about prescribing costs to the inventories and the monitoring activities that we want to do. However, it also outlines a number of mitigation measures that we're required to do in front of our vegetation management projects. And we don't actually call out costs associated with a lot of those. So nesting bird surveys, for example, doesn't actually have a cost in our BFFIP, but it's something that we have to do in order to avoid those nests. So those costs are being captured here in this kind of planning and compliance category. So for vegetation management, our year one target was 1.7 million. We spent 1.3 million on vegetation management activities itself. However, we were able to meet and exceed our year one BFFIP targets. So our year one plan was slightly above our actual adopted budget. So you'll recall that the BFFIP year one plan identified $1.9 million as our operational cost. Our actually adopted budget was 1.6. So we used our resources in an efficient way and we were able to achieve our targets. If we break down all those costs by acres, we can show you all of the management actions that we're doing and the cost per acre. The things that I wanted to call out here is just the construction of new Fuelbreak, $13,000 an acre, is one of the most expensive activities we take on each year. And then the item right below that, reduce fuels and forests. This is our forestry restoration work. And we combined our maintenance with our new sites that did create a slightly lower cost per acre because of that combination. However, we were extremely efficient this year in part because we were in a part of the watershed that was very accessible. So our crews were able to work more efficiently through those areas due to the topography and the conditions on the ground, which reduced the overall cost. And then just like I noted before, our final one, control priority weeds and grasslands, is a slightly higher per acre cost because of the skill level that is required by those contractors doing the work. So a few things to summarize in our vegetation management report for this fiscal year is that we did exceed our year one targets by 220 acres. The district was in relationship to Broom, we were under broom removal by 33 acres in our Fuelbreaks. We were under new broom removal sites by 63 acres. However, our focus this year was really on treating previously treated broom sites, and we were over by 105 acres. So we came out somewhat awash in those broom management areas, but in future years, we'll be more focused on trying to hit the targets for each of those management actions. And some of that does come down to when the required maintenance regimes for specific Fuelbreaks was lined out. So the district was, in regards to forest restoration, we were over by 10 acres. This is to some degree just on the ground conditions allowed for us to do a little bit more work. The district was able to maintain more forestry restoration sites. We were over by 8 acres in that category. And as I mentioned before, that's something that you're going to see year after year, is that this maintenance of forestry restoration sites will continue to go up. We were also over on our dam maintenance, and then the district didn't need new weed control trials or reintroduction efforts. This was partly due to us adopting the BFFIP partway through the fiscal year, and we will be prioritizing this for our next fiscal year. In regards to our inventory monitoring and planning, I just want to call out again that our compliance costs were higher than estimated in our plan, and that will probably continue to be the case as we scale up our vegetation. But this is a critical activity that ensures that we can do it in a way that avoids having an impact on the resources that we care so deeply about on the watershed. So also in our first year of the BFFIP, we identified a rare plant inventory that would be completed. And I will remind you that we completed this in fiscal year 2019. So that document does exist, it's been completed. And in this next fiscal year, our inventory that we're charged with completing is a forest pathogens and pests inventory. So we'll be conducting an RFP and bring on the appropriate technical team to help us conduct that inventory this year. And then we've also developed a multi-year grazing trial around the Porteous Fuelbreak. And that's something that we're going to carry out for a number of years. We just completed about 2 weeks ago, and we'll continue to move that forward year after year and monitor conditions. We're also collaborating with our one-TAM partners on the regional forest health strategy. This is an important endeavor that'll help us identify additional forest rework that could be done on the district's lands as well as our partner agency lands to really create a more resilient landscape throughout Marin County in general. And then we're continuing to conduct our monitoring work within our resilient forest pilot study sites, and we'll be bringing forward another contract this in the next couple of months, identifying how we'll be continuing with that work over the next couple of years. So with that, that's kind of an overview of the entire report, all the management actions that we've completed, and a summary of some of the findings for this first fiscal year of implementation. So with that, I'll take any questions that you might have on the vegetation management work that we conducted this year.
Okay, thanks, Sean. That was excellent. Questions?
Yeah, I have a question. A good job, Sean. I mean, this is obviously a lot of effort, more than just a lot of effort. It's very thoughtfully put together and so forth. I heard one TAM mixed in throughout that. Can you describe a little bit more the nature of the help that they provide? For example, is it primarily in coordinating with our other partners? Do they have technical people that get, boots on the ground assistance as well? That sort of description.
Yeah, of course. So there's kind of 3 areas that I would say one TAM is bringing a lot of lift to the district. One of those is in the vegetation mapping effort, countywide update that you've been hearing a lot about. This is really giving us some of that data and geospatial information that informs our management, right? And they're bringing the technical capacity as well as a lot of funding from a diverse array of funding partners to implement that project. So that's a data set that will be really informative to how we move forward with management in the future on our landscape. The district was very forward thinking and doing some of that mapping in 2004 and 2014 to see the spread of sudden oak death. But an updated data set will be very informative for the district. In addition, and as we mentioned with the early detection rapid response, that's really boots on the ground. So they're providing kind of technical guidance around some of the invasive plants that we want to be managing, and also conducting on-the-ground surveys of our roads and trails and known patches throughout the watershed, and actually going out with a small team and removing those. Similarly, they have a rare plant monitoring program where they're working cross-jurisdictionally to monitor rare plants in serpentine areas for endemic species, and they're conducting that work, and that's boots on the ground, really technical level work, going out and actually counting small endemic plants within those serpentine barrens. And then additionally, some of the planning work that they're doing under the Forest Health Strategy, we have a grant through the Coastal Conservancy as the One TAM Collaborative, and that's really taking the data that we're getting from the Veg Map and starting to look at where can all the partners think about forestry restoration in a meaningful way. And that's a very kind of robust study that's going to bolster some of our work and provide some kind of higher level technical scientific thinking around what we're trying to achieve and our desired conditions within our forests.
Okay, thank you.
I have some questions, Larry. I'd like to say first that I think, Sean, that was the best report I've probably ever seen at the Water District, but definitely the best report on this subject. And I really enjoyed it. It was very comprehensive and very interesting. And I appreciate the metrics of showing the cost per acre and all those kind of things. A question, you used the term closing the watershed, and in reality, we don't actually close the watershed, huh? It's closed to vehicles, and I think we should amend our statement to say that it's closed to vehicles, not that it's closed. And then the next question is, should we be closing it? I mean, really closing it? How much risk do you think we suffer by having people on the watershed during the red flag times, if any? And the last comment I have is, I think we should repeat this at the board meeting. I don't think you need to do the whole thing. Maybe start with the summary sheet and then specifically give the sheet about the cost per acre, because I think those are the kind of things that would go over well. You could also repeat the whole thing. It's valuable enough to repeat the whole thing. I just think it might be a little longer than the board meeting might justify.
Yeah, well, thank you for calling out the closure. You're correct that we don't close the watershed, that we just simply close vehicle access. And so that is the difference. Historically, we have tried to close the watershed to all users, and it was very difficult due to the vast number of entry points that we have. And I think the intent behind, closing vehicular access is really, that's the ignition source that we see, is people coming in with vehicles, potentially using our picnic areas. And so that's why that's kind of the priority of our work. One thing that Don's been working on is actually looking at, can we close Bolinas Fairfax Road during red flag warnings, which we do think there would be a benefit in working with the county to do that. However, I don't know that closing it to hiking and bicyclists is going to do a lot for us in regards to ignition reduction.
What's the alternative if you close the road for access? How would they get to where they need to get to?
It would be closed.
Isn't that the main roads? The main road?
It would be closed beyond the Meadow Club. So it's really just from the Meadow Club up to Ridgecrest Boulevard, and there's gates there already. This was done recently, and Don can speak more to that. And we found it beneficial to have it closed during extreme weather events.
When that was done a couple of weeks ago, was it us that did it, or who actually makes the decision?
It was in conjunction with DPW. They have the ultimate authority. It's their road. And I requested through the sheriff's office that we do it. And I got zero pushback from any agency, fire, law, or DPW.
Yeah, and I believe it was closed from the Meadow Club all the way out to Highway 1, I think. Is that right?
Correct. So there was a couple of reasons we did that. In this particular season that we're experiencing now, and with the fire out in Point Reyes, we had minimal available fire resources to respond if we had an incident. And that was one of our main concerns and one of our main reasons for making that request. If we can remove any portion of people going out into the far, far lands of the watershed and creating a problem for us, we're better off for it. Now, in conjunction with that, we did close it all the way down to Highway 1, but we notified Bolinas Fire and the agencies down on the coast out there that if there was an evacuation, we were going to open it up eastbound and allow people to use that road to get out of there. The other road that they would use is just go down Highway 1 to Panoramic, because the evacuation point was actually in Mill Valley, but not everybody is going to go there. So we made that agreement that if there was an evacuation, we would open the road back up for eastbound traffic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And to answer Jack's question about, can we just close the watershed to everybody? The answer is no. And I say that before I got up here, they used to try to do that. Mm-hmm. But this watershed is so porous and there's so many avenues to get onto the watershed that you can't stop hikers and bikers. They tried to, and they just spent the entire time chasing people saying, hey, you can't be up here. Even when you post signs at the entrances, they still just walk past it and do what they're going to do. So the next best thing was to stop vehicle traffic from coming up here. And that's where we are today.
But Don, if you do shut down pedestrian traffic as well, even if you cannot totally enforce it, it must have an effect in at least diminishing the amount of people that do go on.
I totally agree with you. And that's one of the reasons I like having that sign be a little bit ambiguous, saying that the watershed is closed, because I'm trying to discourage people from coming up here without having to tell them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Don, we should make that clear. I think that's sufficiently important to do an op-ed on that or something like that.
Make it clear. What do you mean make it clear?
Make it clear that we would prefer people not use the watershed during the red flag.
Right, right.
That is closed to vehicles. When we say it's closed to vehicular access for their safety and for ignition source, but also that really the best thing to do is to not access the water district at all, walking or bicycles during this period of time.
I agree with you. I just think that in saying that, and people still come above, it becomes a useless, it's not even a law, it's just a suggestion, and people are going to ignore that suggestion. And I don't know how to approach that, to be honest with you. I mean, if we can say we discourage you from coming up here, knowing that we're going to get some people that'll obey it and some people won't, I mean, that's a win, quite frankly.
Yeah.
What if we used video surveillance at the entrances?
For what purpose?
To put something like you know, like they have at the airport that says, you know, don't enter, and take a picture of them.
Well, yeah, but what are you going to do with that? The problem that we have, it's not an enforceable ordinance right now. We don't have any avenue. You know what I'm saying? So we're going to get pushed back onto cameras, first of all. And then we're trying to enforce something that we don't have any backing on.
Yeah, but we could fix that.
Well,
If you come to us with a proposal, we can fix it.
I think we're creating an issue.
well, what about this, Don? If we change our ordinance that says essentially, when we say the watershed is closed, we mean to bikers, hikers, and vehicles. We mean everybody. And then we promote it, even though we can't enforce it, we promote it as a good citizenship. Please stay away from the watershed, you know?
Exactly.
You know, I mean.
Well, I agree with that. I think that if we make a very strong suggestion that it's a safety issue and everybody should stay away from the watershed and avoid this area because of the high fire danger, yeah. I think that's probably the best that we can do. We are going to get some people that abide by it and some people aren't.
Right. That's true. Yeah, for everything, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Couple questions. The most important issue this year is fire. And the one thing the report sort of only refers to obliquely is whether we have an overall strategy. I mean, I know we have the fire breaks. One of the things I think we should be studying is the past fire shadows or the past paths of fires in the watershed, so that maybe we can focus on where we think we're going to get a fire, where the prevailing winds are really going to hurt us. So the other thing, I'd like to hear, what's the plan for next year? Are we going to be increasing our strategy to deal more directly with fire? I got the letter that we're going to be sending to homeowners, which I think is a great idea. But again, it's a question of enforcement. Do we have any authority to enforce the fire break rules with adjacent homeowners? And if we don't, who does? Is that a County of Marin issue or a municipal issue? From what I've heard, a lot of the fires actually are going to be jumping from neighborhoods into the watershed. That's the more likely scenario, just based on probabilities. So I think that's something I'd like to see us address in the coming year. Another issue or question I have is about whether we have adequate equipment. I know, we're not our own fire agency, but I think it would be a good idea for us to at least get one modern wildland fire vehicle up there. I mean, the fire vehicles I've seen that we have are very old. They have limited water capacity. And I've seen the new trucks. I think Ukiah got a couple of these new wildland fire tenders that look awesome, that can, they can actually go into roadless areas with large capacity. And, I think we've been really lucky the last few years I've been on the board. We've been able to control things by early response, but I'd really like in the coming year for us to do an inventory of what we have and some suggestions. I know we got a new dozer, which I think is great, but I think we really need to take a hard look at our mechanized response. Really glad you guys got the goats going down at Phoenix. They look like they did a great job. So I'll be very curious to see how that pans out in the next few years. So I guess, My primary question is about adjacent homeowners and whether we can kind of focus on that going forward, and what, if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So for your first one regarding wildfire study, one of the things we did in our baseline study for our 1995 vegetation management plan is actually we did what you just said, which was look at the landscape, look where fires have historically been, how they spread, what the historic fire frequency and regimes looked like. And then in addition to that information, that kind of fed into where we constructed our fuel break infrastructure. But then more recently, the Marin County, through the CWPP process, is using the updated vegetation map data to rerun wildfire models for the county. So once those are rerun, that'll be a really helpful data set for us to pull from, and then start to look at where we can get the most benefit from our vegetation management activities. And it would be a really worthwhile endeavor for us to start to evaluate where we can get the best benefit from doing these activities on the watershed.
And when, Sean, do we have any idea when that mapping will be done so we could take a look at it?
The CWPP is being updated currently, and that model is being updated. I imagine before the end of the year, that model will have been run and published.
Okay, and maybe you could bring that by the board when we get it, so we can take a look.
Absolutely. And then in regards to defensible space, we're continuing our work with Fire Safe Marin. There is a focus on, private property owners and how they can create more hardened structures and manage the defensible space. So we'll continue to work through that group. And one of the things we'll push for is to get some focus on, those properties that are adjacent to our open space lands, not only are the water district, but also Marin County. And put some thought and thinking into how we can focus either inspections or support on getting defensible space managed for those sites.
Yeah.
Sean, I would really suggest you talk to the fire guys. There was a seminar that we co-hosted about 5 years ago on a Saturday, somewhere out towards Kentfield, one of those conference rooms. And they had a series of pictures, which I thought were the best I'd ever seen, of houses near the WUI. And what they showed this house, and it said, okay, this is when it was built. Then they showed it like 5 years later, and then they showed it at the time of the seminar. And they said, basically, when it was built, there was enough vegetation break they could manage to put the fires out if that came. Today, at the time of the conference, they said they couldn't defend the house because it would be totally engulfed before they got there, before they could physically respond. And the pictures are great. They're overhead pictures of this one house, and they just show what happens and what you need to do and how to institute the break. It really drove the point home very cleanly. I think we could probably put those pictures in a letter or in a handout or something, and just show what happens when you don't do the fire vegetation break.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think we could work with our communications department to think about how we can get some messaging out around defensible space, and specifically with the properties adjacent to the watershed.
And, even if we had the water meter readers hang a door hanger when they're out there, just to remind the people that it doesn't have to be subjective, in that he doesn't have to make a decision, or she doesn't have to make a decision about whether it needs it or not. Just hang it on all the ones that are at the end of those dead ends.
Yeah. Or, that should be part of our communication strategy too, with billing and stuff. But, I hate to say it, but we're going to need enforcement, I think, at some point, and support, because you have a lot of homeowners, they can't do it. They can't afford to do it. So it's a very challenging situation for us to deal with. And, I don't know if Don, if we have any enforcement authority for that type of thing. I know,
Well, I was thinking, I think that's part of that Measure A program with the county fire, where they're having fire personnel go out to each individual house and talk about defensible space and what they should cut back and stuff. And I think they have authority and they have funding to help the homeowner. Yeah. And I think that most of the residents that are surrounding the watershed are in county jurisdiction. with the exception of probably, well, Kentfield is also county. But my first thought is let's reach out to County Fire and see what they can do to help us.
Yeah.
I think they have the resources. And
Great idea, Don. You know, I own a property in Lake Isabella area, and we just get a note from the fire guys. They say, time to do your weeds, you know, which means if you don't do them, we're going to do them and send you the bill.
Right.
So, you know, there is power in the fire end of this to make you do it.
Yeah, I think they'd be a good
it's-
resource for this.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems there's some reluctance, and it's understandable. Nobody wants to be, you know, the hard guy. But, you know, given what's going on and the risk that we're dealing with, you know, we've got to somehow make a shift, just so that people kind of, you know, have a different expectation of what they need to do.
What was you made an interesting comment, Larry. What's the basis of the likely risk is to come from us to the watershed, from the homeowners to the watershed? Where does that come from?
I've just read, you know, when they've done, you know, most fires are set by people, you know, I mean, aside from this dry lightning, we had 13,000 strikes.
Yeah.
I think CAL FIRE's done studies, and, you know, most fires are human caused fires, accidental mostly.
I got you. It wasn't specific to this,
No.
the PSPS or anything. I see.
No.
Yeah. No. That's a point
But
that at the conference that Larry is talking about, which had John Landau and Mike Swayze doing it essentially. John Landau said the risk out there is not watershed to the houses, it's the houses to the watershed.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a shocking concept. It's not, no, I don't know if it's shocking. It's certainly counterintuitive.
Well, if you walk these neighborhoods, you know, there's just a lot of people are not able to really deal with their property. And, you know, we've got to come up with some strategy to change that. And, you know, coordinating with county, I think is very important, because there's some funding there that maybe we can get for watershed related activities. So there's some opportunities that we need to be jumping on. And then the last thing I think I wanted to hear about is equipment. It just seems that, I know we're not the primary responder, but it just seems when we've got 21,000 acres, we need to modernize some of our equipment. So any comments from staff about that, or could we look into that?
I will just clarify the equipment. We are getting a new excavator and mulching masticating head for that excavator this month. So that's actually a new piece of equipment that'll really help us with our Fuelbreak maintenance, as well as our roadside brushing and our forestry restoration work. So we are taking steps in that direction. As far as additional wildfire equipment, I think that's something we can definitely talk about and think about and kind of come up with some potential options for. It's really a cost of how we, you know, can make use of our watershed budget to get additional support like that.
And Sean, if we got another dozer or another masticating head, could we scale it up if we got another piece of equipment? I mean, I'd like to know, are there efficiencies that we could leverage? You know, I know it's expensive, but if we could get that cost per acre down with more efficient equipment, you know, then, you know, it might work out. It might be worth it.
Or maybe, Larry, if we could talk to the fire people and ask them, you know, what piece of equipment would be helpful to them. You know, we might want to have them do the fighting as opposed to us, depending on where it occurs. But there may be some vehicle they would say, well, it would be perfect. If we had that, it would make a difference. Or maybe we need 3 of those. You know, I don't know.
But I'm even talking about, you know, some of the fire break maintenance and fire fuel reduction. If we got another masticating head, you know, would we be able to scale up with enough efficiency to justify the investment in another piece of equipment, which, we probably would need another operator. But if we could scale up the number of acres and reduce the cost per acre because of that mechanical efficiency. It's just, I don't know if you guys are keeping track of the data on that granular of a level, but it just seems like, we've begun this journey, and I think it's just there's a lot to learn. So
yeah, and I would just say that we recently, hired a new forestry contractor, and the contractors that we're bringing on with this equipment, they are in a very real way allowing us to scale this work up, and often in a very efficient fashion. It does take a number of people on the ground to do the work. So the equipment is one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is just the supporting staff on the ground. So, and an example of that is in the forestry work that we just did around Potrero Meadow, we had 5 contractors and our own staff working. So we had 3 contractors using heavy equipment, 2 contractors with heavy equipment, and our own equipment out on those sites, and working in a very collaborative way. But in addition to those pieces of equipment, we had 3 to 4 ground labor staff from those contractors working alongside them to ensure that, one, we could make sure people don't come into the work areas, but also to actually do the pruning behind the masticating machinery to get the desired conditions on the ground that we were hoping to achieve. So the equipment is one part of the equation, but it does come with the need for additional labors on the ground as well.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's much more complicated than it appears at first blush. I know that. So, we're really just at the beginning of this. So, any other comments or questions from the board? Okay, you want to wrap it up, and then
Chair Bregman, we actually have public comments.
Okay.
The first one we have is Barbara Salzman. Ms. Salzman, you're on mute.
Yes, thanks. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I just first wanted to say that I think that the effort of focusing in on the historic areas of fire is really what I've been concerned about all along here, and I'm glad to hear you're doing that. And I think that there was a mention in your discussion of fire about the importance of structures. And I think there's some data recently that indicates that, in fact, it is the structures that are the major problem, not that the vegetation isn't a problem at all. But I'd like to see us have more. I don't know if you have any jurisdiction over hardening houses, but I'd certainly like to see more of that going on. But anyway, I had a couple of questions. I'd like to know if we're getting a handle on the broom. Do you have figures on how much broom there was last year at this time as compared to this year after your work? Is there totally less or the same or more?
So in regards to broom management, we map it about every 5 years to see the spread. Trying to see the spread on an annual basis. The amount of effort that it takes for us to get staff on the ground to actually map all of those, one, is significant and isn't the best use of our resources, but also we don't see the spread on an annual basis as much as we do over multiple years. So our management is reducing it, but to have a long-term effect on the broom populations, it is going to require multiple years of on-the-ground management before we really start to reduce it in a meaningful way.
Yeah, well, you've been working on it a while. So when's the next time it's supposed to be, or when was the last time you did an overall?
We presented an updated map in 2018, and then so we've been doing it every 5 years.
Okay. Do you ever try moving over to oak and sudden oak death? I've used this on my trees. Have you ever tried, I know it would be too expensive for the whole watershed, but whatever it is, the application of the substance that supposedly controls the Phytophthora. And it did work on my trees, I have to say.
Yeah, there's research going on within kind of the scientific community about different applications for an individual tree that can be done. There aren't applications that can be done that have been demonstrated to be effective on a large landscape scale quite yet. And a lot of what we're actually dealing with now is tan oaks that have already died and fallen to the floor and created a large buildup of forest fuels, and then the resprouting of those tan oak trees growing for 10 years and then dying again. So this is the cycle that we're really working on. There could be an application in some very focused instances where we could treat a tree here and there, but no, we haven't been doing that on a broad scale by any means.
I think it would be interesting if you can get somebody to come and do it for free to do something. And lastly, I'm wondering, I've lost track of this. Are you using the CAL FIRE environmental document or for this work, or did you do your own? I can't remember.
Yeah, good question, Barbara. We're using the Biodiversity, Fires and Fuels Integrated Plan and the programmatic EIR associated with that plan that our board adopted in October of 2019. The Vegetation Management Plan that CAL FIRE put together is a kind of document that others can use to do vegetation management and tier off of, but we are not doing that currently.
You did your own. Okay, so
Thank you, Ms. Salzman, for your comments. The 3 minutes are up. I'm going to go to the next speaker. Next speaker is Larry Minikis.
Yes, I want to respond to some of the comments that were made. I'm on the environmental Sensitive Practices Committee, ESP, which is under the MWPA, and we're the steering committee that is working on how the money is going to be allocated. So we're going to help to make some recommendations to the board. The board will make their own decisions, but we're on the ground right now. And one of the things we're discussing is the removal of vegetation with people that may not have the funding to do it, which was mentioned during this meeting. And we're looking at how, particularly for retirees and such, how that might be funded in the future. We're not there yet. And the comments were made, well, the fire people have money. Well, that $19 million, where the real focus is going to be for at least these coming 5 years is not so much on clearing the WUI, but it's going to be on escape routes, on getting people out and opening this up. And that's where a lot of the focus has to be at first, because there's just so much fuel load that we know the most important thing right now is to save lives. Property will come later. Our other concern is that we're seeing, and I've been in 3 meetings already this week, we're seeing people start to remove heritage trees, large trees, and it's not the trees that are the problem. So there's a lot of education that needs to be done. It's the way the trees are being managed in terms of brushing them up and in terms of how much water they receive and such. So you can have 2 of the identical trees, and one can be a bad actor and one can be a good actor depending on how it's being managed. So I'm trying to be really focused because there was a lot of comments made and I could go on for a long time, but I only have 3 minutes here. I would like to see us at the ESP get together with some of you folks. We really haven't had an MMWD ESP meeting since you're not really a part and parcel of the MWPA, but it would probably be helpful because I think we could share a lot of information at this point. And as I said, we're in hours of meetings every week now working on one of our big discussion points right now is biomass. It's not a problem for you because you can leave it on site when you chip and grind, but for the community, we're trying to figure out how to take this biomass and move it in such a way that we keep the greenhouse gases down. Like right now, there's 9 trucks a night going out to Stockton with this stuff. And we're saying that's just not going to be acceptable. It's only going to grow. So these are the kind of issues we're working on. How to sequester carbon from all of this, because if you just chip it and leave it on the ground, that carbon is still free. It's not sequestered. So we're looking at methods of gasification, all of these kind of issues. There's a lot on the floor right now that we're grappling with, and having you guys involved would really probably be a good thing, considering you have 21,000 acres to manage there. And with that,
thank you, Mr. Minikis.
that will be my 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay.
We do not have any further commenters.
Okay. Okay, everybody's satisfied. We've covered it. All right, thanks, Sean. Don, thank you. It's good, and hopefully we'll get another shot at it at a regular meeting. So what is our next item? The drone program, I believe.
Yep.
Yes. So good afternoon, board and other members and guests. So I'm Don Wick. I'm the Chief Ranger for the Watershed and Protection Manager. Been looking at a program involving drones for the use up here on the watershed, not just for the rangers, but for kind of everything that we do up here. My interest in it is it would greatly enhance our ability to respond to things such as lost hikers, scouting a fire prior to units arriving or as they're arriving to see the extent of it, to know what resources we need to call in. But it's interesting in this conversation that Sean just had, there's a multitude of things that a drone could be used for in that plan that he presented, such as scouting out vegetation management, fuel loads, even going as far as scouting out the jurisdictional separations between the residents and the watershed that we just talked about. So we have some sort of idea of what we're dealing with. For the rangers, I think it would be enhance our ability as a great tool. It's being used by a lot of agencies around us. Public safety has adopted unmanned aerial systems across not only the state, but also across the nation, and they're having great success with it. And they're being used for a multitude of different things. There's one agency, and again, this is not something that we would look at doing, but I just find it curious. One agency down south is actually, they have 3 drones staged around their city, and they're launching a drone to any in-progress call and sending it overhead before the officers arrive so they can see what's going on and see what best avenue the arriving officers can take so that they're not in harm's way. So I think that's a phenomenal use for it under those conditions. County Fire is looking at using it now. They flew it over the Woodwood fire to get an idea of the extent of that fire and where it was burning hot. There are other LA Fire Department has a huge drone program going, and they're using it for everything: search and rescue, delivery of supplies for hurt people. One of the main things that we deal with up here, especially after hours, is lost hikers. And to have the ability to launch a drone and get an aerial view of the area and where they possibly are, and using some sort of infrared or a thermal imaging that would allow us to identify a person out in the middle of the darkness would be huge to us. It would save us a lot of time. And so I just see nothing but a huge benefit for us, not only as the rangers, but also on the watershed itself. Just I went to a conference a year ago, and my mind was boggled by the amount of things that they're having drones do these days. And this industry is nothing but growing larger and larger. They were using it to inspect power lines, look at dams and infrastructure. And I think that our engineering department is already utilizing that for those reasons. And I'm bringing it before the board today for your consideration. It is an investment, but I think it's well worth it. So I don't know if you have any questions for me.
I just have a comment. How fast can we do it?
Well, don't we already have the drone?
Engineering has 2 drones. They have DJI drones, which they will share with us. It's just a matter of us getting our program up and running up here in conjunction with theirs.
Yeah, because it seems like that would be the ideal way to do it fast, is just get the pilot. Now, Ben, since Jeff left, we have another pilot, or we don't have any pilots?
Well, part of the recommendation is to get, I don't know, all the rangers, Don, or some of the rangers certified so they can do some piloting. Is that right, Don?
Well, it's interesting. Before the COVID event, I was in the process of getting a Part 107 license. I have one other ranger that I have approached. He's interested in doing it. So I would get 2 of us up and running as far as pilots. There are 2 people downtown that are pilots. So we could form kind of an ad hoc team, quite frankly.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a licensed pilot, and I doubt the FAA has changed the system. They used to publish booklets with all the questions and all the answers. I kind of doubt they've changed that. I would suggest you take a look at the book, because you still may need coursing and all that. But frankly, you know, the FAA, which I think is very logical, operates on if you can pass the test, you're qualified.
Right.
So, and their argument is if you want to memorize all the answers, that's perfectly fine. Because if you memorize all the answers, then you know the answers to all the questions.
Right.
So, you know, it's not like you're being shorted by that. I just suggested take a look at they used to publish the whole thing. And I can't imagine it's changed. I haven't taken an FAA test for a while. But, you know, when I did my regular and instrument both, and it was all laid out, you know, boom, 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 and it's organized. So suggest you take a look at that.
Okay.
I think it's a wonderful idea.
I also support it. We're going to get some pushback from the public about privacy concerns. I think Jared can look into that. You know, when I saw this, my brain went back 40 years to USF Law School. And I think if we're going to be using it over the watershed, it's called the open fields doctrine, which essentially says there's no expectation of privacy when you're outside the immediate curtilage of a residence. So that being said, I think Jared could look into that. The other thing that's going to come up is the encryption of the data. And so that is something we need to do. We need to tighten our data collection up so that it is our own work product and not hackable.
Right. No, and the all the companies that are supplying for the public and for public safety are very sensitive to that. DJI, which is the biggest drone seller right now, they're based out of China, but they have a U.S. Division, and they're very sensitive to the whole Chinese using our information topic that's going around. And they have assured the United States users that they're using the highest encryption key right now, which is a 256 key for their stuff. And it is not transmitted at all to anybody outside of that drone. It's actually captured on the drone, and then the user does what he wants to do with it. But they're assured that it's very secure.
No, I mean, I think technology, it's a huge tool for us. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So.
And I think that once we get into it, we're going to find nothing but more uses for it, quite frankly.
Yeah, no, it's pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah.
So good. I guess you're encouraged, and hopefully give us an update.
Well, one thing I want to caution Jack about is everybody I've talked to going into a drone program, they say do not rush into it.
Really?
And so I deliberately kind of held myself back. I'm really looking at the products out there and how to best go about doing this so that we're successful and the public is comfortable with what we're doing.
Then do it as fast as you can.
And we'll periodically come back to the board and share with you how it's going, how we're using it, and how the program's developing.
Yeah.
Good. All right.
Clearly an excellent idea.
That's a really good one.
Brackman, we have 2 public commenters.
Please.
The first one is Larry Minikis.
I have a big smile on my face because I pulled up my letter from October 1st, 2014 to Krishna saying that I had this woman, Donna Deleu, who was writing the ABA regulations for drones, and I'd like her to come speak to the board about bringing drones. And I wrote that I'd already met with Mike on this. So Don, you can tell the public that you started looking at this in 2014. I'm just smiling because I was like, yeah, you guys need drones. I'm really happy to see that you're moving forward. And I agree with Jack as quickly as possible and with Larry. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Barbara Salzman.
Hi. Yeah, it sounds like this is a good use for public safety. I just wanted to put in a word of caution because there is, of course, evidence of there being impacts on wildlife. I mean, you have a lot of big nesting birds in your area, and so, and also the wildlife use on bodies of water. They can be flushed easily. So with that, I hope you'll take that into consideration in your use. I mean, if it's an emergency, that's one thing, but it should not be used indiscriminately so that it impacts wildlife.
Well, Barbara, and I appreciate you bringing that up because that's one of our concerns that we looked at. I know we have nesting owls and all that.
Yes.
And even if it was an emergency, we have a 400-foot ceiling that we can certainly clear way above that area. And the cameras are such that you could probably still get a really good shot of what you want to take a picture of or a video of.
Oh, well, that's good to know. Good. Thanks.
Good point.
Thank you. We have no further comments.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, let's move on. Thanks a lot, Don. That was really good. Okay, final item, CCC agreement addendum.
Yeah, good afternoon, board members. Sean Horn, Watershed Resource Manager. The item before you is the California Conservation Corps Agreement Addendum. The recommendation here is for review and referral to a future bi-monthly meeting of the Board of Directors with the Watershed Committee's recommendation to authorize the General Manager to execute an addendum to the California Conservation Corps sponsor agreement in the amount of $195,000 and permit the CCC Corps members to camp on the district's lands while they're conducting their spikes. So I'll remind you that this last year we were working with the Conservation Corps during the COVID pandemic period. We could not find local camping. And so one of the things we did was actually set up a temporary campsite at the Sky Oaks headquarters at the old Girl Scouts camp, and the CCC spiked out of that location. And we found it to be extremely efficient in that the crew did not have to commute to and from the watershed each day. So they were on site and starting the work. It was also simply a more supportive environment for the Cs to be working from our lands. And we had, a significant amount of oversight on that campsite and that crew because we have a ranger's residence there at Sky Oaks. And then we all are also reporting to Sky Oaks on a daily basis. So they had a crew there to support them. They could connect with our team and then make their way out to the project sites. And so we would like to issue a special use permit for that again within this agreement addendum. And just to understand the sponsorship agreement that we have with the Corps, it requires that we do this addendum each year to kind of outline the tasks that we have for them and the total project cost associated with those activities. And there is a savings to us by allowing them to camp on site. We don't have to pay for their lodging at other campsites, so that's a good thing. This year, we have a number of great projects lined up for the Cs. So this is an expanded contract. We typically have had contracts under $100,000 each year, but we really have benefited from the C's support in conducting our vegetation management, specifically for some of our Fuelbreak maintenance, as well as our forestry restoration work. They're a very good crew to be on the ground working through those sites after we go through with our machinery. And then they can also support our pile burning operations as needed, which is a big help to our permanent maintenance staff. And then we have also used them in the past for trail maintenance. And so they're a critical crew for conducting that type of work as well for us. So with that, I'll take any questions you might have and any thoughts on the potential special use permit as well.
Okay, any questions from the board?
I'm all for it.
Okay. Larry, you good?
Yeah, I'm cool with that. I do have a question though, it's unfortunately on a different subject. The issue about Broom caught my attention there, Sean. I thought we were losing the battle with Broom. Are you saying that we're actually controlling it?
No, we are, it depends on how you look at it. What we found in our last mapping exercise that from our management, we were able to reduce the spread from 50 acres a year to 20 acres a year through management actions. So that's
okay. Okay, that's helpful. That's helpful. That's good. Yeah. And then to get the next 20 is probably 5 times what we're spending, huh?
I mean, yeah, significant level of effort increased.
Yeah.
Right? But we're really
that's cool. That's a good number.
Okay,
And you think we're on that, we're doing that?
Absolutely. Yeah, continuing with the same level of management and increasing as we step up each year.
Back on the agenda. I'm cool with that, Larry, what we're doing there. with
okay.
the, amendment.
I think that's it. So we're unanimous on referring it to the full board. Any final closing comments by anybody, or we're out of here? Okay.
All right.
Do we have any public comments?
Yeah, we do not have any comments, public comments.
Okay.
I
All right.
would like to say this, Larry. I'd like to thank Larry and Barbara for joining the meeting and making comments. I think it was very helpful.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. This usually a great meeting, and it was very helpful. Okay. All right. See y'all.
All right.
Okay,
Thanks all.
thanks.
Adjourning
Good
the
job.
meeting.
everyone.
Okay, great. Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.